My name is Phil Martin, and I'm the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in Los Angeles. I'm delighted that you could join us for a conversation about Pamela Jordan's solo exhibition at the Gallery Light Falls. It's on view now, and if you have any questions about it, obviously feel free to send an email or give a call. It's really a delight to do this show. It feels like a major one for Pam. And she's going to tell us all about it. So how are you doing today, Pam?
I'm great. Thank you. Nice to
Awesome.
be here.
Yeah, well, it's a thrill to have a chance to talk to you about it. Do you want to start with some opening comments about the show or whatever might be on your mind?
Um, well, yeah, let's just, I mean, we're starting looking at the installation, and I think that's, a really exciting part of the show for me is
Hmm.
to maybe for one of the first times to show some smaller work with larger work, and
Mhm.
almost all the pieces in the show except for one are two-part pieces, diptychs. So um, it's been really exciting to look at this work up and think about the scale shifts between paintings. Also, those things happen within a painting, but to really kind of activate the space with I don't know, like kind of a movement that sort of jumps between the paintings a little bit.
When you
I
say
think.
movement, tell us a little bit more about what you mean there.
Um, well, as you can see, especially in these two paintings on the middle and right, they're composed of two parts, and so you can see that curve on the back wall, and then also along the kind of moving um, curve on the right painting. But
Mhm.
I've been interested in how these breaks and ruptures in within the painting frames create um, kind of an activity of sagging or leaning or sometimes kind of I don't know, they put pressure upon one another, I think too, that I'm painting these works kind of simultaneously and also separately as two parts. So they kind of go back up on the wall when I look at them and consider where they are in the process, but they're also kind of separate pieces as I work on them. So they're often kind of like leaning or flat, or there's sometimes gravity that moves the paint across the surface. So um, that kind of activity of moving and changing happens within the painting, but I think also within like how the frame um, works.
Well, they're incredibly dynamic, and I heard you
Yeah.
use a few different words there. You talked about kind of the way in which the things seemingly come together, as I understood it, and you use the words sort of sagging and leaning. You want to talk a little bit more about what you mean there? Do you with those words?
Well, um, yeah, it's a very physical process for me. These are actually both these pieces that we're looking at now are 80 inches tall, so they're um, it's and
All
often
of
I'll stretch the paintings myself sometimes. Sometimes I get a little help with that, or it takes a couple people or to help me. But I feel like there's such a kind of active process, um, and also I've thought a little bit about um, dance and contact
Mhm.
improvisation, how maybe two figures might interact with each other, how there's sort of a unexpected um, interaction and movement and play and pressure. And so those things I feel like kind of happen through the process with me, but have also been a way for me to think about how these two parts interact with each other as a finished painting. Also, there's my interaction with the painting process, which I
Right.
feel like kind of like
So just to help our viewers visualize, um, in these paintings, you're painting them flat, and
Mhm.
what that means is that the paint is on the painting, pooling in the painting in different ways, and the materiality of the paint itself, whether it's a transparent pigment or it might be a pigment that's more opaque or somewhere in between the two, or the pigment might be something that's incandescent. All those kinds of things, as we know, paint is dirt or plant matter sort of in a vehicle, so to speak. And
Mhm.
that vehicle, in this case, is something that's water soluble, because generally speaking, you're using water soluble stuff. So again, you have this kind of pool of material that's suspended in there, and then it settles. And
Mhm.
that kind of creates these flows and those kinds of feelings. Is that correct? And then you have the two parts that have been made with the intention of them coming together. They're being made separately with some eye to one another, but then as you point out, they then come together to make the final whole. And in that point, you end up with these kind of dancing or leaning or different kinds of interactions with one another that you're describing in a variety of ways. Does that jive, or tell us more?
Um, yeah, that sounds, yeah, I'm pretty right on. And I do use water-based paints and um, oil-based paints and solvents. So I kind of go back and forth between, well, I start with the water-based and then build up with
Mhm.
the it's on top. But the one thing I've really played around with is the way the surface tension in a water-based paint and a water mark across the surface is quite different than the oil, and it will I can create these cuts and lines actually with those types of mark making, and
Uh-huh.
um, often the solvents will disperse in different ways,
Oh,
and
that's interesting.
yeah, so it's been a way to kind of think about how the paint will behave, how it works.
Uh-huh.
Often it dries in a way that's unexpected to me. It might, especially as the pigments kind of dilute in a solvent of some sort.
So that's
There,
new. That's actually new information for me, because some of the cuts are so clean. I
yeah.
know you're not using tape, but
Uh-huh.
you're saying that some of that clean feeling in the cut is actually because of things, the different vehicles repelling one another, so to speak.
Or the with a mark that's kind of a water. Sometimes I'll paint with water and then pour the paint into that, and it'll kind of scoot up to the edge of that mark or create a
Uh-huh.
line and so it reacts differently with the medium that is kind of and how I apply that to the surface. So there's a lot of trial error play. And sometimes I think we talked about this a little bit before, but I'll start with an idea for a painting, how a couple marks might sit on a surface, and then how that paint might react to a pool of water, whether it's wet into a wet surface or a harsher
Hmm.
mark made with just a brushstroke of water, and then I kind of start to respond to that and react. And
That's super interesting. I mean, I'm a clumsy person, so I have a tendency to overfill water glasses, so to speak, in the most quotidian way, to where we're veering on near disaster, and have always been kind of fascinated about that bubbling of the water at the top of a pint glass, for example. And of course, there's some surface tension there. So you're actually saying that in some senses, you're adding things. You watch that suspension, say, move towards the edge of the fluid pool. Is that correct?
yes, and
Wow.
sometimes I'll kind of watch and wait for it, see what is going to happen. Sometimes I'll end up kind of leaning the stretcher and letting it pour over the sides, or
Yeah.
um, and interact with the edges. So there's a lot of activity and kind of waiting and watching, sometimes actually coming back the next day to see what happens too.
Someone that is more clearly detail oriented and scientifically minded than myself has asked if what we were talking about is the meniscus. I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is?
Well, I wonder what they mean by that, but is that kind of, the surface, I guess,
Hmm.
possibly they're suggesting, or but there's a lot of layering in my work, some more than others.
Hmm.
The painting um, through the doorway or walkway here
Hmm.
is a very like thin, kind of ephemeral surface that almost was created in one go, which is sometimes
Really?
kind of rare.
And
But
it's a big area.
yeah, it's a big area. But then there are other parts of that painting that are quite layered.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe if we have a detail later, we'll
Oh, we
see that.
do.
But then,
We have many
um,
details.
okay,
We're
but
moving
then,
through the space and we're now in the second gallery. So there's plenty of details of those pieces. Just to look at it from a distance, you're saying that this came together, this very large painting came together in one pass or one working
parts
set.
parts of it did. Other
Parts of it.
parts, it was actually a painting that was hanging in my studio for about a year. So
Yeah.
really the first painting finished, but it was probably the least painted on. But there are parts of paintings that are really open and other parts that are quite layered and worked, and they changed a lot. I take a lot of pictures along the way, so
Yeah. And you
um,
do a lot of contemplative looking, to be perfectly honest.
yeah, I do. I tend to isolate them through looking at them um, through photography sometimes, and just kind of focusing in. There's a lot of I'm a kind of messy painter. There's a lot of activity in my studio. Everything's
Mhm.
lying around, drawing or back and forth on the wall. But I tend to have a sense of these relationships that'll kind of jump between paintings sometimes, and then by taking pictures, I can kind of
And you mean
isolate
the
them
sides of the paintings, or you mean between different paintings?
between different paintings.
Hmm.
And I think, in the first room, you'll see like the a cutout that sort of repeats vertically and horizontally, and two
Yeah.
paintings at a little different scale. And so
Well,
things
we
like
can come back around to that when we
okay.
get back to those shots, unless you want to talk about it now. Um,
Um,
I'm
yeah.
all I'm sorry.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, I was also just thinking, when you look at a painting like this one, which is tell us about what you see in this painting. I mean, how do you see these marks coming together? And you're describing a looking process by which you're pushing what you're doing. Talk to me about some of these different marks and how do you see, how did this painting get to where it is? Can you go back and tell us like what marks created, say, layers or space or surface texture you were excited about, or gestural possibility? Like, tell us about the material signs of this painting and what you see them doing.
Okay. Yeah, like the two parts to this painting, you can
I'll
see how
just
they
show
kind
people with the cursor. The two parts are here.
of
And then this one
right. Okay.
also is a two-part painting too. They're all, many are that way in this show. But anyway, go ahead.
So the bottom half of this painting was mostly, I don't know, it kind of had a different approach in some way, where there was like a little bit more drawing in it in a way. Those
Mhm.
blue lines are kind of, fast. I
Mhm.
had a sense of how I wanted to kind of carve that space, maybe repeat the curve of the stretcher frame to
Yeah.
some degree, but also have these lines that would kind of end at the edge of that frame and then
Mhm.
be cropped in a way. And so the top half started in a similar way, but I guess I ended up pushing the top half further through layers of paint that, um, one thing it's hard to see in pictures, but if you do happen to see the show in person, you'll see that there are really kind of shiny areas of paint
Mhm.
and very matte areas. There's probably a little bit of metallic paint in there somewhere. So light really affects how the painting appears as you walk by it. It's sort of
Mhm.
moving and changing. And so when I'm layering paint, I have a lot of windows in my studio, so I'm thinking a lot about how light interacts, and sometimes I I want to push those relationships further, and that leads to the paintings getting more layered and
Mhm.
dense. And sometimes I just decide, oh, this isn't working for me. It's
So when you're
you know,
talking about layering and density and say this upper part right here, do you see that in terms of pictorial space as well, or are you talking more like materially, one thing on top of the other, both?
um, I think materially, it does end up, I think sometimes having some pictorial reference. There's something almost like web-like, which I've been thinking about a little bit, like
Uh-huh.
um, these like lines and webs or spider webs, or like how, a spider might construct a web, like,
Uh-huh.
and also the geometry and that is, improvisational, to some degree, because nature, wind, whatever circumstances might cause that geometry to kind of shift or reshape or something. So I've thought a little bit about that, which might slightly be a pictorial reference, but there's a lot of kind of material play and texture, and creating kind of a space in the painting that excites me, that seems like it's active and moving, and kind of many things at once in a way.
Mhm.
And sometimes like the shiny black areas in that painting on the left might kind of, when the light's hitting it a certain way, turn completely gray. So it'll have a relationship to a shape below it. But looking at it from a different point of view, it's becomes something different. So that I don't know, activity of moving and changing, I think, happens in areas that get really dense and layered at times. Um, yeah, and this one on the right, the larger piece, has so many layers in it too. I mean, I think sometimes I like it when it feels somewhat effortless, but it's not at
Right.
all in the process. There's a lot of um, density there.
And these
And
kind of more gestural appearing sections has become part of the idiom more recently in some of
yeah,
the newer paintings.
yeah, and I think it's kind of coming back to something I used to do more
That's
a little
that's
bit.
right. Yeah, that's true. That's right. You're referring to paintings from what period? 2014, 15 kind of area? Even before that?
Um, yeah, maybe even before that.
Yeah.
I um I think, when I started working with circles, probably 2012-ish onwards,
Right.
I was also working with I did some experiments with bleaching,
Yeah.
and just using materials differently and in a more kind of experimental way for me. And
Hmm.
the pores helped me kind of work through those ideas with chance
Yeah.
and gravity and just all these active
Yeah.
ideas. And then, I really thought a lot about like Pat Steer recently, and
Hmm.
how she layers, and there's a great documentary that about her, that where she talks a lot about improvisation, and seeing some in person here in LA recently, the texture and the layering, and how you can really get so much out of just maybe what seems like kind of direct and immediate pours, but there's just such a great complex surface to those paintings. So kind of
Right.
feel like recently inspired how this painting evolved.
Yeah. And this is also an interesting one in that we have the diamond, which we kind of brought in as something to kind of set off some of the other paintings in this show in a fun way.
Yeah, that's kind of the oddball painting. It's the only non-diptych in a way,
Sure.
but it there are a lot of sometimes I've tried to work with really kind of regular geometric shapes, and I find it really challenging because there's
Right.
so much symmetry in there that it makes me super uncomfortable. But there are a lot of kind of cuts and triangles um, and shapes in this work where I feel like there's a repetition and like geometrically in some way, but there's a lot of organic movement within this piece, but also
Good.
kind of the hard line too.
So you used the word just, being uncomfortable. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, or what that experience is?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's kind of a constant state of mind for me during my my process
Uh,
at times. But then, I like to. I mean, it's a challenge to work this way, but I also like to not totally know where I'm going
right.
with the work. And so there's it brings up a lot of surprises and possibilities for me to kind of work through where they're going to land through the process. But
Mhm.
um, I want them to be surprising to the viewer. They are to
Right.
me. So
Yeah.
and so it's maybe that feeling of not what you might expect from a composition or a set of relationships is something I kind of strive for.
Yeah.
But yeah, and oh, go
Well,
ahead. Sorry.
it's interesting because one of you obviously are not using, say, the rectangle, which is one of the most basic givens that most artists work within.
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting because there's a certain amount of certainty there for people, and it's intriguing that sort of right off the bat, that's something that you're not doing. Was it a process to get to moving beyond the square or
Um, Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like I thinking back to my first show with Klaus von Sagen Gallery, there was a circle in that show.
something?
And and so it's maybe, it's something I've been kind of thinking about a long time, but I was working with squares some instead of rectangles, which would allow me to kind of move the painting in different directions while I was kind
Mhm.
of figuring it out. I would also sometimes start with a black ground on a gessoed surface. So with a rectangle or a square, it was kind of the basic first layer was a black ground. And
Mhm.
that immediately asserted shape for me
Yeah.
on the wall and scale. It wasn't like a white slate that kind of had that relationship to the wall to begin
Mhm.
with. It was immediately shape. And so I think a lot of things I was doing kind of led me into working more. But I think that movability and, although I do make these structures or design the structures to be oriented in this way, like I kind of am not totally planning out what they're going to be in
Right.
the end or how the paint will um, crop in or
Right.
yeah, like on the right side the paint sort of shapes creates another type of shape, so the relationship of the raw linen to other less painted things becomes shape, other ways of kind of carving and shaping
Well,
and
some of the things that's really nice about works like this too, that's interesting, is going back to that conversation about the exterior shape, the acceptance of a rectangle or square, and then
Mhm.
say the movement to the circle. In both of these pieces, what I find really fascinating with regard to having looked at your practice is they're very effective in terms of, in a way, coming back to assumptions and throwing those assumptions into relief, and yet still another way. So, meaning that when you make a circular piece like this, then immediately a lot of viewers, this is a real surprise to them. And I have to say, why is it normal that you have a square? How did
Mhm.
that come to be the normal thing? I think these are also really interesting in, say, a home, for example, because once they go into conversation with other odd shapes, lines, all that kind of stuff, they're super fascinating, and they do something in a domestic setting that's completely different than in a gallery setting, which people may or may not,
Yeah.
they won't necessarily know until they have one in their houses. But then I think what's interesting is then to say, look at this piece here again, where now the circle itself, as our initial move away from to find something new, away from what is accepted somehow, that gets thrown into relief by the decision to cut it. And now, like, the circle is suddenly the term we're used to. And now we're in this new relationship within that. I find that really thrilling. I don't know if any of that resonates with you, but it's one of the things that is a surprising aspect of these paintings to me that I've enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun, and I'm very grateful to um, the fabricators that really helped me kind of figure out how to do almost anything that I want
Yeah.
to try. But it's really fun to play with the space. The rectangle. I'd been working with some 80-inch circles,
Mm.
tondos. It kind of turned out that like the windows in the gallery are 80 inches tall,
Yeah.
and so they're kind of those paintings are actually the same size as those window panes.
Ones like
But
this.
yeah, so I kind of like the idea of like bringing in, you know, in some ways like a relationship to an architectural space with a
Mm.
show. I'm thinking about all these paintings as um, you know, paintings that are going to get to hang out with each other and
Yeah.
see and play off each other. And so it is kind of exciting to think about maybe if they go somewhere where
Yeah.
what their interactions they may have with a space. And that to me is really exciting to
Well, they're really
also.
fun. I mean, I think also this is a painting that I particularly like because, somehow because of the cuts, um,
Yeah.
I really just see these lines in this very clear way that I don't normally see. I mean, this one has a kind of line that becomes this thing, but I really like what these are doing. They're really, it's really exciting. So we're kind of actually coming to the end of the webinar here as we go through these last images. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that maybe we should cover?
I don't know. I mean, I just think it was really fun to install this show for me.
Mhm.
I hope if people are around LA, they'll have a chance to take a look in
Yeah.
person because they're so different
Yep.
in person, and they are playing off each other a lot. Like those cutouts,
Mhm.
the kind of way it's been, like I said, really fun to have the scale shifts happen between paintings with the small work and um, just get into like detail and texture
Yeah.
uh, and all those things. So yeah, it's been really fun to have them up and um, exciting.
Yeah. Well, the
um,
show is on view until, is it the 22nd? I think it's the 22nd. I have to, not looking at the calendar, but I'll have to look at that. If you have any questions, it's on the internet. Feel free to email with anything that you might have. If you have any thoughts or questions about the works, feel free to, of course, be in touch. It's been such a pleasure. I just feel like this is a major show for you. One lives one's life and looks for the unusual stuff and surprises oneself. So, who knows what the studio holds for you. But I really, really like the show in New York at Klaus. And I really was excited to have the opportunity to show these pieces in LA. People who come, and we're always very busy in our location in Glassell Park. So people can come tomorrow and they can have Persian French toast at Lemon Poppy, and then they can come over or go to Bub and Grandma's or whatever. But people totally spend a lot of time. I think people are really, there's a lot to look at in the show, and that's really exciting, and it's really fun that you gave us some time today to just talk more about it. So thanks so much, Pam. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if anybody had any questions, to contact me later.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Philip. Thank you so much.
Have a great day, and we'll talk with you later.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.